It's Tiki Technical Tuesday on January 1st, 2022. Happy New Year! It's a new year, and I thought that we could kick off the year with a brand new mug. Last year, we traveled to Mysterious Island making the Little Amy mug. Now, this wasn't our first trip to Mysterious Island. We had gone to that magical island many, many years back in one of the very first mugs I ever made. That's right, folks. I'm talking about the giant crab claw. Now, I made these way, way, way back in the day, like a long time ago. This was, in fact, the very first mug I produced for Tiki. Now, I made a lot of hand-built mugs, but this is a slip cast mug. I did a flask. That was my first experiment with slip casting, and then we moved on to making mugs. I was so new at the time, I only made one mold for this, and out of that mold, I only cast 40 claws. There's only 40 of these in existence in the world, and I kept 2 of them, so there's actually only 38. I can do math. Now, before I get all of the messages on how is this a mug, how do you drink from it? You drink from it like this, and you just don't put it down until your beverage is finished. Now, I only made 40 of these. I was learning. Now, I do love this mug. I love it. But I think we can do better than this. I think we can make it bigger, cooler, more interesting, and more importantly, I think we can make more of them. So that is what we're going to sculpt today, a giant crab claw. Now, in order to sculpt things, you need 2 things. You need an armature and some clay. Let's cut to the armature montage. Whoa. We're going to kick things off with a template. To start, I have my selected claw of choice printed out at the exact scale I want to make the mug. Now, I, of course, compensated for the shrinkage of the clay, so it's a little bigger than the final mug will be. I've glued this to some foam core, and I'm going to make a template out of it. It is like a frame of a negative space that represents the shape of the claw that I want to make. How am I going to use this? Well, you'll see. I've done one for the front view and the side view. Next up is the armature itself. I'm going to be making a shape that's going to live inside of the clay. The purpose of the armature is to support the clay while you're sculpting. This clay is a soft material and we're making a big shape, so structurally it probably couldn't hold its own shape without warping. I am gluing this carefully designed paper template to a block of plywood, which then I will then take into the messy half of the shop and cut up using a jigsaw. So I am kind of making this up as I go along, but the one thing I do know is I want one of the pinchers of the claw to be removable. Why? Well, I'll explain that later. For now, I'm just going to make a little dowel, put it in here, and this is going to make it so I can take one of the 2 claw bits out. I also put a lot of holes in the armature base. This is to let the clay get a good mechanical bond to the armature so that it doesn't move around or slide off while sculpting. We stick the thing onto the base using some screws, and we want this thing to be very secure. Now, we're almost done, but we still need to add a little extra, and that extra is going to be this wire. I'm using 2 types of wire, a very thick copper wire and a much more malleable, I guess it's like a steel baling wire kind of situation. I'm going to wrestle this very heavy gauge copper wire into position using some pliers. This stuff is really strong and it's difficult to move around. I'm using the template there. I've got both a positive and negative template for my planned claw. Once I got the piece that I like, I cut it to length and we are going to firmly affix it into the claw using epoxy. My epoxy of choice is this 2-color epoxy. I love this because it actually turns clear when it's properly mixed. Watch. Science. It's fantastic stuff. So we're going to use this epoxy to firmly anchor these wires into the armature. Now, I am not gluing that dowel in. I want this thing to be removable. We want to make sure that I can take that section out while I'm sculpting and for the mold making part of this process. Once the epoxy is set, I grab that smaller baling wire and I just fill in the space between the big copper wire. I'm doing this to just give an even more mechanical surface for that clay to bite into and grab during the sculpting process. So that takes care of the armature, but we're also going to need some clay. I am perusing my clay drawer and I've got a bunch of monster clay in both the hard and medium versions. I did the little Amy in this medium gray, and I think I'm gonna stick with it because I've got a lot of it. You may remember when I sculpted the AME, I felt that the medium was a bit maybe too soft. In fact, I was using what was supposed to be the hard version of the monster clay. Turns out it was mislabeled, it was the medium. Now, while it was soft then, that was summer, and right now it's winter. And I don't know if you noticed, yeah, that's snow outside. So it's quite cold. I keep the studio pretty warm, but it's definitely not as hot as it was in the summer. In the summer, it was like in the 80s in here. It's currently 69. This is a wax-based clay. It depends on temperature. So the medium is now much more firm. So we're gonna go with it. I think it's gonna work out wonderfully. If you have watched Tiki Technical Tuesday before, you know the drill. I am going to take this giant block of wax-based sculpting clay and break it down into many tiny little cubes of wax-based monster clay. It is a painstaking process using lots of sweat, muscle, and a lot of care because I don't want to catch my finger under this putty knife. If you're wondering why we're doing this, it's because we're going to be putting this under a heat lamp to soften up the clay. I know I just talked about how great it is when it's firm, but you want it soft to pack onto the armature. It just makes it go a lot faster. Now, if I had just put the giant block of clay under the heat lamp, the surface would get soft, but the back would never heat up. So we break it all up into little chunks so the heat can get onto it uniformly, and it gives me nice little like bite-sized pieces that I can stick onto the armature. At least that's the plan. It's always kind of a guessing game how much clay you're going to need to get a sculpture done, and it's kind of an important game because this clay is not inexpensive. So I am thinking that I'm only going to need one container. I went ahead and cut up two, but I'm only going to heat up, well, like, I don't know, like 90% of just one container because I think that that's going to get me through the majority of this sculpture. Okie dokie, we have got a finished armature. We have got our paper reference in multiple scales. We have got the foam core templates, which are in both a negative and positive shape. And would you look at this? The monster clay is soft and ready to go. I think we're ready to start sculpting. So here we go. We are off to the races, and this is where those paper templates are really going to shine. So this initial stage is all about mashing that clay onto the armature. You want to get a good bite. I'm mashing it into those little holes that I drilled. I'm squishing it all around the wire. And then look at this. I am using the foam core template to make sure that my overall form and scale is correct. I put the clay on and then check it against the template. Now this template, it gives me like an imaginary line that I can follow for both like a side view and a front view. I started doing this because I was watching wood carvers and they would sketch their planned carving out on the block of wood. And I thought, well, you know what? I can do that in clay. Clay is kind of an additive thing instead of subtractive thing. So I use like a negative space template so that as a guideline when I'm adding the clay instead of drawing it onto the wood that I'm carving away. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Anyway, it helps me a lot. I make sure to ping pong between both the front view and a side view template. This claw has a unique shape looking at it from the thin side also, so I want to make sure that I get that line correctly. I lay out like an imaginary line of clay, as you can see, that to define the edge of the sculpture, and then I blend those two. I blend the side view and the front view lines together, and that fills out the form of the sculpture. This blocking out phase of sculpting is a lot of fun. It's just kind of like sketching. You're going fast, and you're just worrying about the general shape, the general flow of the piece. You're not even thinking about surface. I'm not worrying about all the little lumpy bits or the little cavities in between the blocks of clay that I'm sticking on there. I just want to make sure that the scale is in, the proper proportions are there, and yeah, that I just like the general shape. Okay, we have been going at it for a while, and I think that I am happy with the way that things are looking so far. You've noticed I have pretty much just used my hands, and occasionally I've used this little plaster knife because I am just blocking out the very basic forms. I'm just making sure that from a distance, the silhouette reads correctly, and I am just really just focusing on profiles. I think it's time for me to take out some tools and start really to dial in shapes. There's a challenge for me when sculpting. It's really easy to just like fixate on one little area, and I always fight to not do that. You want to go like general all over everything, and then just slowly refine shapes over the whole surface, never dialing in on one specific spot. At least that's the way that I do it. Let's get the tools. Do I have a lot of sculpting tools? Yes. Do I have too many? Never. So I grabbed a variety of kidneys. These are by Mud Tools, and the serrated ones are wicked sharp. Be very careful if you're using these in the studio. I also have this gigantic serrated loop tool. This thing is really great for blocking out big shapes. I have a variety of other tools. This wire-wrapped looped tool. I've got these. These are my favorite little hooked rake tools by ZM Tools. I've got them in 3 different sizes, from big to itty-bitty, a giant guitar string loop tool, and a combination guitar string serrated loop tool. Ta-da! Oh, and I've also got this little, it's just like a little hardwood shaping tool, like a little clay tool. I keep it with my seaming stuff for when I'm seaming the mugs that we cast. That's why I didn't grab it out of the toolbox. But I love this thing because my thumb is soft, and if I'm smoothing out the monster clay after it started to firm up because of the cooler studio, this is like the wooden thumb. It's much stronger. Now that we've moved past the blocking out stage, I am actually starting to care about all those little gaps and spaces in between the lumps of clay. So I'm filling these in and then using the tools to smooth it out. So you may be wondering what kind of crab this is. Now, we've established that it is a giant crab from Mysterious Island. Now, in the film, Harryhausen used a stone crab to do to make the stop motion giant crabs that you see in the film. They are actually real stone crabs. He famously got those for dinner and then took them home and used the actual shells to put over the armatures that he had to do the stop motion animation. Very clever way to do it. Now, the first giant crab that we did years back was when I was living in Hawaii, and I wanted to do a crab from my home. So I did what's called an ama crab. It's a stone crab that lives in Hawaii. Well, I guess, I don't know if it's a type of stone crab. It lives on rocks, I can tell you that. Now that we're in Oregon, I wanted to do an Oregon crab. And yes, there are stone crabs in Oregon, I think there are. But I didn't want to just go out and do that exact type of crab. I wanted to do a crab that we often see when we're looking for agates on the coast. I love looking for agates on the coast. I'm kind of a rock nerd. So this claw is going to be based on an actual claw that we found over in Coos Bay, I believe. And I'm using that as kind of a starting point. I'm not copying exactly. I'm going to go a little off script because it's Mysterious Island and mysterious things happen. So I'm using that as my starting point to get my general forms. And then from there, we're going to, see what happens. But there's a lot of really crazy things that happen in crab claws. There's a lot of really complex shapes. And I find that if you don't put them in there, it doesn't read as a claw. It looks kind of cheesy. So I want this to really look like something that you might find mounted on a trophy wall, like discovered, Mysterious Island, 1930. Anyway, that's the goal. Yes, I did sculpt for several more hours, but I'm guessing you're getting a little tired of time-lapse footage by now, so let's just cut to the end of the day. Okay, I think I'm gonna call it for today. Here is where we're at. Very happy with the way things are looking. I have got the rough shape dialed in to where I want it. Now, the first day is always the fastest day with sculpting for me because you're just blocking out forms and getting the general shape. The low, slow, nitty gritty, icky part is filling in all the details and refining all the surfaces. So that is what pretty much all day tomorrow is going to be. And then maybe even another day after that to get everything dialed in exactly where I want it to be. I am very happy with the removable little pincher thing. It worked out really well. So I will be casting these in 2 separate pieces. And if you are wondering if I am thinking about mold lines and parting lines, of course I am. You've always got to be thinking about that stuff if you want your casting to go well later on down the line. So I'm already envisioning where I'm going to put my parting lines. I am envisioning how many pieces this mold is going to be. I just like to think about it now instead of panicking about it later. Yeah. Do I like these little spikes on this guy? I don't know. They're just temporary. We'll see if we keep them. See how I feel about it tomorrow. See you then. It's day 2, and we are back onto the giant crab claw. Today is the day we just continue to refine the surface. We started with the rough and blobby, and now we've got to turn that into the smooth and clean. And then after we get the smooth and clean, it is texture time. Full disclosure, this part of the sculpture is where I start to really second guess myself. We had a blobby form, and the blobby is fine because it's just kind of the general shape. But then when we get into like refining it, I start to because its surface just looks clunky. But I have to remember it's going to be cool in the end, and I have to just trust my gut and get in there. And that being said, I do love the overall look. But anyway, enough talk. And you can see, I did put a couple little, I'm thinking of how I want to do some texturing. I want to put like little micro spikes in there. I'm kind of excited about that. I added a couple of spikes on there, which I kind of dig. I'm excited. Anyway, let's get to it. Today is all about adding more details and smoothing out all the lumpy, bumpy stuff on the sculpture. We want to get rid of all my thumbprints, finger marks, and whatnot, and make this look like a smooth, organic, and yet, naturally lumpy claw. Once I was happy with the overall look of the claw, I moved on to the pincher part, taking it off of the main sculpture and putting it in this little handy clamp so that I could, really work on it without messing up the other half of the claw or damaging anything in the process. One of my favorite things about crab claws is when you look at them like under a magnifying glass, they have teeth on the insides of their claws. I think it is so cool, and I love sculpting that part. All right, well, here is where we're at. I am done with the rough tools, the rough sculpting tools, and I've got the shape really blocked out nicely. Very happy. Now, is the texture and surface finished? Not even close. There's still lots to do, but we're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere, and I am super stoked. Okay, so where am I at now? Well, I've only got about an hour left in the day, so I don't want to really start tackling the surface too much, but I am going to knock it down just a tad. When you use the rake tools, sometimes you can get it's almost like sawdust on the surface. So I will be using a Scotch-Brite pad, and I also have a sponge with even like a little softer Scotch-Brite, and some alcohol, like isopropyl alcohol, which I'm going to squirt on here and just kind of sand down the surface of this clay. Why do I use alcohol instead of water? Well, you could use either one, but the alcohol is nice because it evaporates quickly. And I also think that it has a cooling effect as it evaporates, which I think helps to harden the clay and help in the sanding. Let's try it out. Protect the lens. All right, here we are, end of day 2. Surface is semi-smooth, form is looking great, and I think that we are ready for texturing, which we will tackle on day 3. It's Tuesday, and I finished my work early. I was supposed to wait until Wednesday to get back onto the sculpture, but today's glazing went faster than I thought, which means I can get back onto the claw. Now you can hear the kiln clicking away over there. Sorry about the noise. Over the past few days, the claw has been sitting there on the table, and I walk by it every day, and I'm really glad I got some time away from it because it's given me a chance to really look at the form and think about any changes I may want to make. I do totally think it's great to step back from a sculpture and just give your brain time to just think about it without staring at it. It's nice to see it at a distance like I was. Things look different far away than they do up close. And in this time that I've taken away, I've decided I want to push this a little further. Back in the day, I worked at a special effects shop, KNVFX Group. I love you forever. I did not sculpt while I was there. I was just kind of a lab technician. I did sculpt a couple tiny little things, but there were a lot of incredible sculptors there that were miles ahead of me in their career. And I'm just really happy that I got to watch them work and learn from them. There was a guy named Jim Cagle that came in, and he sculpted, well, I guess he kind of led up the sculpting team on these giant alligators we sculpted for a terrible movie called Eraser. And people always said that Jim was great at just pushing a sculpture. He would always push it past where normal people would leave it. And I always try to think of him when I am doing sculptures. And looking at this, I realized I can push it even further. The teeth on the claw were not really pronounced enough, so I've already just started before I even taped this. Full disclosure, I went and I added a little bit more. And I just want to push some of these overall shapes and planes a bit more before I get into texturing. I think I can get just a little more oomph out of the general silhouette and shapes of the claw. So I don't have a ton of time. I've only got like a half an hour. So I'm just gonna really just sketch back into the clay the details that I want to push up or shapes that I want to change when I really get down into this sculpture tomorrow when I have all day to work on it. There's a saying in editing, and it's kill your darlings, where you don't want to get too attached to things. You want to be willing to change things. And that's kind of where I'm at with this right now. I've started to do detailing in final planes. I shouldn't get too attached to this form. If I think I can make it better, I should be willing to just slap more clay on this or cut things away and just, you know, make it as good as it can be. Okay, I'm out of time today, but I can't wait to get back to it tomorrow. What have I done? Well, I added some changes. Bigger teeth in the claws. I redid all of the bumps here. I wanted to get these bumps looking a little more natural. I thought they looked too uniform before, so now I've got them at different sizes. They're not quite spikes, they're more bumps, which I'm gonna integrate into the texture that I have planned for the rest of it. I've got just a little more interesting surface planes going on. I wanted to just get a little more interesting surface so that this really looked like, you know, an organic thing. I'm gonna have to play with this a little bit more tomorrow. I'm excited about what's happening here, and I added, now they don't exist on the crab that I picked up at the beach here in Oregon, but in Hawaii, the ama crabs have these neat little like divots in their shell, and they have these little furs that grow out of it. And my guess is, now I am not a marine biologist, but I'm guessing that that is how they feel, because I'm guessing there's no actual sensory, you know, they can't sense things on their exoskeleton, so they have these little furs that stick out. Anyway, I put those in there. I thought they're kind of neat. This is very rough. We're gonna go back and make them better. But that's it, I'm done for today. Be back on Wednesday. That's right, folks. It is day 3, and we are going to finish this thing today. That is after I earned the Academy Award for the part of sleepy sculptor, getting up early to finish his piece. Today is all about surface, final detailing of the surface, and then adding a texture to that surface. It is kind of a nitty-gritty thing, and I'm not going to put you through the torturous of watching me do this in real time, so we're going to do some very quick stop-motion time-lapse wizardry and get to the smoothing part. Okay, so I've got things cleaned up because it's time to start to work on that surface texture. Apologies for the audio, the laser's running in the back and it's a little noisy. Sorry, hopefully you can hear me. So, monster clay is a wax-based clay. That means it's very dependent on temperature. Now, we have been using up until now Scotch-Brite pads and alcohol, but there's another thing that we can use to smooth out the clay, and that is heat. And I have always in the past used this little like creme brulee torch to smooth out the surface of the clay. It probably goes without saying, but I'm gonna say it. Be very careful. You can quickly melt all of your work into just a little pile of blob if you're not careful. This is a wax-based clay and it melts quickly, so I'm just kind of dabbing at it with the torch, just being very careful not to ruin all my work. Watch closely as all those little rake lines disappear with the torch. Okay, it is looking awesome. We've got the surface beautiful and it's ready for the texture pass. Now, I have got a lot of like detailed photos of the actual crab claws and they have a lot of texture on them, but I don't want to mimic this texture exactly. This is not a close-up view of a miniature claw. This is an actual size claw of a juvenile giant crab from Mysterious Island. So I'm gonna kind of invent what I think my own idea of what this specific genus of crabs shell texture would be like at this scale, not at the like miniature scale, not at a crab claw this big. This is this big. So we're gonna take some artistic license with our texturing. The main texture I applied using a variety of stylus tools. There's these tools with kind of like a ball on the end. I have a bunch with like a large sphere. I have ones with smaller spheres, and I work them over this plastic to keep them from really sticking to the clay. I then go back and I smooth things out and kind of knock the detail back. I want this to look like a big ancient crab claw, even though it's a juvenile crab. Maybe it takes 200 years to get that big. Who knows? I mean, like I said, I'm not a scientist. I wonder how big the biggest crab ever was. Like, was there like in the time of dinosaurs, was there a giant crab? Like, is there a fossil record of a crab this big somewhere? I wonder. I don't ever recall seeing that in a museum. And again, I am not a marine biologist or a paleontologist or a ancient crabologist. I've switched to my old standby for like towards the end of texturing, a beat up sponge from IKEA. It has a very soft Scotch-Brite type side and then an even softer like felt pad side. And I go back and forth between the two. For the final texturing, I'm using one of these. It is the seed from a blue marble tree. I don't know if that's its actual name because just like I'm not a marine biologist, I'm also not a botanist or an arborist. But these are incredible little tools for putting a little final surface texture on there, just to give it a little bit of organic. I will, of course, knock this back down with alcohol and sponges and whatnot, but it's just a final little organic surface that will catch some glaze. Okay, we're in the home stretch. Final smoothing. Now, we have used big rake tools to smaller rake tools to guitar string to Scotch-Brite to torches to smooth out the clay. And for these final steps, I'm going to use a solvent. I'm going to use mineral spirits. I'm going to use the mineral spirits and I'm going to start using a stiff brush and then I'm going to make my way to a soft brush. Now, the mineral spirits are very aggressive with the monster clays. I'm going to just put a tiny, tiny dot on the brush and then I will arrest the action of the mineral spirits with a water bottle if need be. I cannot say enough how aggressive this mineral spirits is. I have just a tiny, tiny little amount of my brush. I go over the whole piece, I give the mineral spirits a little bit of time to dissolve the clay, and then I go back and very carefully brush over it with the stiff brush. Once I feel that the clay has gotten to a point of smoothness that I like, I switch to my fine, soft brush, and I'll arrest the action with water. Those are the little droplets that you see on there. That's water, and it tends to stop the dissolving effect of the mineral spirits. It's done! It's done! Woo! Very, very happy with the end results. Of course, this is not the end. We have still got to make a mold of it. We've still got to cast it. We've got to glaze it. You know, the whole slip casting adventure is just about to begin. But that'll be for another episode. For now, do me a favor, like this video, subscribe, my God, it means the world. And I will see you next episode.